modernisation to take place.
You're the government now that is looking at the worst rail strikes in some 30 years, and the suggestion, it would say, to use your expression, that the union barons, your words, are determined to carry on. As a result, will you be hiring agency staff?
So we are going to change the law to ensure that there can be much more flexibility. And the law, which is sometimes referred to as agency, is actually more about transferability. So at the moment, you could have two people working in Network Rail, for example, in a control centre, and they might be perfectly qualified to operate different systems, but can't be asked to move to another screen to operate that system without actually making a payment to them and getting the agreement of the union. So if you want to say, for this afternoon, can you sit over there and do that? You can't do that. So you can't run the organisation as you would any normal business. So that sort of modernisation can be achieved if we can't get it with agreement from the unions by changing the law. And we will change the law in rapid order in the next month or two to ensure that transferable skills are allowed, which will make something of a difference.
But
Each
the
of
union
these
will
things
presumably
won't transfer
oppose.
things.
Sorry to talk over you, Mr. Shapps, but the union will presumably oppose that as well, won't it?
I'm afraid they most likely will, which is, we'd much rather do all of these things, not by changing the laws, but by actually having sensible conversation. But they walked out of the talks yesterday afternoon to go and call a press conference and say the strikes are on. And as a result, we are having to, we'll have to pass laws. I understand that Network Rail have actually written to the union, to the RMT, and said that some of these reforms, now they're formally in dispute, striking in other words, there's now a process that they can go through to put these reforms in place even without the agreement of the unions, according to the law, and that they'll now pursue that approach.
And would this provide for the employment of agency staff as well?
Technically it could, but I think it's unlikely in most cases that would happen because a lot of the jobs are extremely technical, and of course you couldn't take on that job without being appropriately skilled. So I don't think, I often hear it called agency. It is more about the transferable skills than it is about the agency. Technically they could, but in reality I don't think that would be a very big part of it.
OK, I wonder if you can comment. So we're talking about the rail guards who are looking for raises of around 7 or 8%, and they're being offered 3%. This, as it is revealed, Downing Street has asked ministers to ease restrictions on city bosses' pay in a bid to show overseas companies can get the benefits of Brexit. Steve Barclay, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, has written to the Chancellor Rishi Sunak with a plan for, quotes, deregulatory measures to reduce the overall burden on businesses. So, Mr. Shapps, this is a government then that's going to help city bosses come in. £6 billion was paid out in bonuses in the city in March alone. £6 billion. The bosses can come over for telephone numbers, but if you work on the railway, you'll get 3%. Discuss.
Yeah, it's not a story that I was familiar with until I saw it in the paper.
On the arm, yes.
I imagine it's probably related to changes post Brexit and the administration of the way that the financial services industry works. But I'm afraid it's at a level of technicalness and outside of my remit that I'm afraid I can't much help you on there. I'm afraid, Nick.
Right, but how do you think it looks? You're trying to hold 40,000 railway workers to 4%. Meanwhile, if you're a city boss, you'll get a Brexit bonus in an industry that paid out £6 billion in bonuses in 1 month alone, March.
Yeah,
What does that say for your government?
Well, as I say, the only place I've seen this story is on the front of a left-leaning paper, which probably has an axe to grind. So I'd like to check the facts first, if you don't mind.
I don't think they'd make up a note from your colleague, Mr. Barclay, would they?
Well, as I say, it's not a note that I've seen. It's not a story I'm familiar with, and not an area of policy that I know terribly well.
You're saying this is just politically motivated, Mr. Shapps,
well,
are you?
far be it from me to accuse a newspaper with an agenda to be politically motivated, but it could well be.
OK. And again, as to the look of it, Mr. Shapps?
Well, look, I
railway
take
worker
the view.
gets 3%, the city boss gets as much as
let me tell you, I take the view, and I've actually always thought that rail pay, including for senior execs, is high, and I've always taken the view of trying to push that down. And since I've been in post, for example, with the railway workers and the senior execs, so let's talk about that side of things, I pushed down their pay by 10%, the most senior execs. The new chief executive of Network Rail is paid 28% less than his predecessor. So I've been very proactive in ensuring that we're paying less on the bit that I know about railways. As I say, the technicalities of CityPay is not something I can guide you on very much, other than to say London is a major global financial centre, and presumably in competition with others. And there's a difference, I think, between public money, the £16 billion that we pumped into keeping those railway staff, so none of them lost their jobs, and private sector money, which is where the government typically doesn't try to. Doesn't have to impose pay deals.
I'm grateful for your time this morning. Thank you. Secretary of State for Transport, Conservative MP Grant Shapps appearing here on LBC. Timing coming up to 8 o'clock. Just if you're joining us, the story. This is as they are announced. The government, or through the rail operators, are seeking to limit rail staff's pay to 3% plus an additional 1%. They're also ready to tear up the limits on city bosses' pay. So to get a man or woman to come in an industry that paid out $6 billion in bonuses in March alone, but 3% for a railway guard. Let's speak now with the person who, of course, just been described as a union baron by the Secretary of State for Transport. I speak of General Secretary of the RMT Union, Mick Lynch, who joins me now. Thank you for coming on. Mr. Lynch, can I put the same